Okay. Yeah, you can tell by looking at the title that we're talking about a big cluster, right? In fact, this is the biggest cluster that we deal with, far and away. Sub-Saharan Africa is also big, but in terms of the vast, how much of the globe it covers, this is the biggest one. It's huge. Let's see, who here has ever been to this part of the world? East Asia, or Central Asia, Eastern Europe? Anybody here been there before? Okay. Anybody here have like Russian roots or, Central Asia? Okay. All right. Here it is. And obviously, Russia takes the cake. I wish there was a way of turning off. There's not an extra switch over there. Is there just for this light? Is it just one switch for everything? Let me just double check and see if they put a switch.
You should always turn the lights off and open the windows.
Yeah, that's all of them.
Yeah, we all go to sleep and do that. I found it. They were trying to hide it on me, but I found it. Thank you. All right, huge area. Now, you guys didn't grow up when I did, and when I grew up, I would not look at a map like this and see Russia. I would look at a map and see
USSR.
Soviet Union, exactly. Russia was a part of it, but the way you look at this part of the world today and the way I looked at it when I was your age are completely different, right? And so, yeah. Sure.
I've been to Moldova.
Oh, you have?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's interesting. They have this one like city or one region where it's still USSR, and we went to visit it in there. It was interesting.
In Moldova,
Mm-hmm.
It's still called USSR?
There's one little region, and there's like independent, and they're still Soviet Union.
Really? That's really interesting.
Yeah, you had to go through security. It was interesting. Kristen likes visiting there.
Yeah. And were you there with her?
Mm-hmm.
Just the two of you?
No, so Kristen was in Moldova for the full year, for the full academic year, and then we came and visited her for a week.
Okay. Oh, interesting. And if my understanding is correct, the alphabets of the Russia and Moldova are basically the same, just difference in pronunciation or not?
I don't know.
Okay.
Kristen would know.
Okay. All right. We've talked a little bit about that. The language, and of course, that's one of the things that ties this region together. There are lots of language commonalities. And even in the cases where the alphabets are identical, there's a difference in pronunciation. That happened with our reading last year at Missions Conference. What was the other? It was Russian, and then there was another language. It was Ukrainian, I think. I think one of the students, maybe it was your sister, read Ukrainian. She may have done both of them. And the alphabets are the same, but the pronunciation is different. Are any of you keeping up with what's going on? I mean, we're all aware that there's a war going on. Any of you keeping up with that? What are some things that you're hearing about that? Let's just start our class by making some comments about the news.
Just generally.
Yeah, yeah.
Recently, a news outlet in Russia said that put out an article saying that Russia has lost 2,000 soldiers or something there, but then they quickly deleted it. So there's that. Obviously, Zelensky addressed Congress recently, and he recently addressed the Israeli Congress and said that they will be held accountable for what they're not doing or something to that effect.
Yeah, trying to get our country to declare a no-fly zone, which is essentially to enter the war. Yeah, Emma?
It's interesting seeing how a lot of the young people in Russia are against the war, and some of them are kind of taking a stand and just against it.
Mm-hmm. So there are conflicts within Russia itself. And of course, the Russian citizens have been told if they make any comments at all about the political situation, or if they use the word war, they can go to prison. Because the Russian rhetoric coming from headquarters is that this is not a war. This is anybody know what they call that? They call it a military operation. But they're not using the word war. But that I heard a week or two ago, so it's possible that that's changed. I mean, everybody in the whole world knows this is a war, right? Okay, do you understand why the Ukraine, okay? Ukraine, little bitty country next to Russia. Why Ukraine itself is so important to Putin? And there are lots of other countries bordering. Why is he after Ukraine?
They're one of the most westernized countries, so Russia not wishing for their neighbors to be westernized. They want them to stop. So one of the ways we can do that is just taking over.
Why would it bother him that there's westernization going on in that particular country?
And you lose control when people think like that.
Yeah, if you look at Ukraine, of course, Ukraine is surrounded by, European nations. Russia is very vulnerable. What protection does it have? We have two oceans, and those two oceans give us more protection than most of us even are aware of. They just offer a lot of protection. And Ukraine is kind of a buffer for Russia, between Russia and Europe. And Putin is always, the Russian leadership is always afraid of incursions from Europe, and possibly even from China down here, Mongolia, so on, but primarily from Europe. And so one of the excuses used for this is that Russia needs the security of Ukraine to serve as a buffer to guarantee protection from European invasions. But that's only one of the reasons. Yeah, Val?
Hasn't there been like clashes going on between them for a long time now? It's just like gotten really big now.
Yeah. There's a cultural element here that's even more important perhaps than the buffer. That the bedrock of the Russian culture really it can be identified in the country of Ukraine, and specifically in its capital, Kiev. I guess you can pronounce it either way. The Ukrainians possess a culture that is fundamental to the Russian lifestyle, the Russian way of thinking. And for that to be cut off is to cut off an essential element of Russian history and identity. And what organization within both of them specifically would tie them together?
Like a church.
Yeah. And what is the church?
The Orthodox.
Yeah. We hear, Eastern Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox. They're all, they all have their roots back in the split of the Roman Empire, right? But the Russian Orthodox Church, Kiev, is kind of a central location for that. So all of that has been used as a motivation for Putin to say, we have to have Ukraine back. And it's probably not an exaggeration to say that the restoration of Russian greatness and the Russian Empire will not happen without Ukraine. Because culturally, ecclesiastically, the church, Ukraine is a necessary piece of the puzzle. So it looks very small compared to everything, but it's very big in its influence. Now, does all that justify what he's doing? Of course not. Okay, but Putin wants to see the greatness of Russia. USSR may have been a phase of that, but he wants to see Russian imperialism, the greatness of Russia, come back again. And in his mind, that will not happen without Ukraine. Abby, is that a hand? Oh, I'm sorry, I saw you. Okay, so I just thought it would be good for us to kind of use some current events as a backdrop to what we're talking about here, because even though that's not the whole cluster, it is right now, it's the screaming part of it, yeah.
It's interesting, like the arguments that Putin will use for fighting against like Westernization, how he kind of says he's taking like the moral route of it, like fighting against like things that we have in our countries that are westernized, which is kind of interesting when you think
Yeah.
about what he's actually doing.
Yes. What's his position on gender? The whole gender issue.
Very conservative.
Very conservative. What's his position on abortion?
Very
He's
conservative.
very conservative. I mean, when it comes to some political issues, we say, yeah, Putin is right. We agree with him on that. But part of that is the influence of the Eastern Orthodox Church as well, if you understand. And we need to also understand that the Eastern Orthodox Church and the political system of Russia do not believe in the concept of separation of church and state. That's very Western and very American, right? The Eastern Orthodox Church represents and in some senses the servant of the political system in those nations. Very different concept than what you and I have about the church and the state. Not so, which puts the Eastern Orthodox Church in Russia, in Kiev, in a very delicate situation because that church is broader than Ukraine. And yet, is it going to stand with Ukraine or is it going to stand with the Russian culture that it represents? It puts I don't know if any of you listen to Al Mohler's podcast, The Briefing. I really enjoy it. I feel like I'm getting an education. I spent quite a bit of time listening to that one, and he has gone into some detail. The thing I like about his podcast is that he gives us a lot of historical background. He's not out there bad mouthing, other movements. He's very educational, and that's one of the points that he made in a recent podcast that the Eastern Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox Church is in a very delicate situation because of the way it relates to the political system. All right, so, well, hey, we gotta anybody else want to comment? Something you've heard on the news about this that might contribute to our understanding of this cluster? Go ahead. Anybody else has something? Okay, a big part geographically is what we call the steppes. You're probably familiar with them, the Western steppe and the Eastern steppe. And this particular map makes it pretty clear. You can see that Mongolia up there is actually right there as part of the Eastern steppe. It's a beautiful area. I'll show you another picture of it. You have a mountain range that the Altai Mountains separate the Western from the East. But that geographic feature right there has a lot to do with the history of this cluster, because of the difficulty of transportation, and highlands and lowlands have a lot to do with the ability to find pasture land, but just a lot that this cluster, probably more than any other cluster, also it has been influenced over the years by climate and geographic phenomena going on. Okay. Here's a shot I got from, I think, Google Earth. And the blue highlighted areas are the steppes. And you can see how they actually serve as borders to some degree. All right? So we're talking about a mammoth area of land here. I don't know if that's the eastern or the western. I found it online, but it's a beautiful, beautiful area. A lot of it is kind of what we would call wasteland. You don't see much happening there. So here we encounter one of the most diverse cultural clusters in the world where many languages are represented. I hesitate to say more languages than anywhere else because the sub-Saharan African cluster is full of native languages. There's probably no other cluster than that one where you'll find more pockets of native languages. But in terms of major languages, this is probably the cluster that takes the cake. Number two, they are a mixture of European and Asian descent. You guys have heard the term Eurasia, right? And something, I don't know if you've studied, what you've done in the area of linguistic studies, languages. If you take the word, sorry to push you through this right before lunchtime. I don't know about you guys, but I'm hungry. Okay, PIE is a little acrostic that represents some major language groups that existed not necessarily here, but near here. It's called the Proto-Indo-European language. I don't think anybody's ever proven that there existed such a language, but these are hyphenated. Proto means first, Indo-European. Okay, that is this area. There is a general consensus out there that way back when, there was a united language that characterized the Indo-European area of the world. And then eventually over time that was divided up. And of course, secular linguists will say it all happened by means of evolution. And we'll trace it back to Babel and find it. But anyway, just wanted you to be aware that that if you just type that in a search engine under linguistics or something, or Proto-Indo-European, you can find lots of information about that. It's all fascinating. I think I told you before, I really would like someday to get a basic linguistics, intro linguistics course here with Bibles International or somebody. Maybe. I think there are a lot of students that would take it if they could. If we just made it a simple 1-hour course or something, whet your appetite. All right, number 3, this cluster reflects the impact of the Byzantine Empire. Okay, so somebody just tell me briefly what the Byzantine Empire was. You don't have to wax eloquent, but what are we talking about?
All I can think of is the Byzantine text that we looked at for Greek class.
Okay, good. It does come from that region. Yeah. What did you learn about that? Do you remember what was said about that?
We learned that it's the largest text group for the biblical Greek texts, but it's also one of the more diverse ones and it's not as old as some of the other ones. I don't remember what they said about the Byzantine Empire. I can't remember.
Do you remember them associating with the majority text?
Yeah, the majority text.
Yes, that's often used in relation to the Byzantine text.
Yeah.
Right. King James and the New King James come out of the Byzantine.
They just come out of a small section of Byzantine text. The Byzantine is very large.
Yeah, the King James comes out of the Textus Receptus, which is a subset of that.
Yeah, it's a subset.
Yeah. That's quite a discussion. A friend of mine sent me an article about 14 pages long or so that he wrote discussing the difference between those texts and the advantages and disadvantages and stuff. It's quite a discussion. So there's a city that's associated with this, and that city is called?
Constantinople?
Well, okay, yes, but before that, it was called Byzantium. Okay, that's where this word comes from. And then, Emma, was that you that said?
Constantinople?
Yeah, okay, so the name of the city changed from Byzantium to Constantinople when? Or, if you don't know exactly the year, why did it change its name? Well, what does the word Constantinople remind you of?
Because of Constantine.
Yeah. Constantine, right, around 313 or so, he apparently converted to Christianity, which is a big part of the history of this region, right? And became, anyways, so it was named after him, Constantinople, and later the name changed again to its current name, which is? It is the capital of Turkey, Istanbul. So Byzantium became Constantinople, which became Istanbul. Yeah, well, that's a ton of history here. So much time to study it, right? Yep. You say, I'm having trouble sitting at the feet of Jesus, not to mention sitting at the feet of historical textbooks, right? That was a good message this morning. I really appreciated what he had to say. Okay, so the influence of the Orthodox Church. Okay, so when did the Orthodox Church begin? It's related to what we're talking about here. It was a result of what happened in the empire? What happened to the Roman Empire? before it dissolved.
It's broken up into four
Yeah.
parts.
It's split up into two, actually, main groups. The Roman Catholic Church represents the Western, the Roman side, right? Whose capital is Rome, Italy. And the Eastern side became the Orthodox Church, right, under Constantinople and the others. Now, we're not going to take time in this course to study the differences between Catholicism and Orthodoxy. There are differences, but they're not significant enough differences to justify, to call one of them true Christianity. Okay. But as I said earlier, we hear about the Orthodox Church, the Greek Orthodox Church, the Russian Orthodox Church, but they all are Orthodox Church. What does the word Orthodox mean? You should know that. We even talk about having Orthodox theology, right? What does the word Orthodox mean? It's a compound word. It means the right way. So, in other words, when the Eastern Orthodox Church broke off from Rome, they believed that they had the right way and that Rome was corrupt. So they became known as the right way church, the Orthodox Church. So when we talk about having Orthodox theology, we use the word, same meaning. We believe that our theology is right. It's correct theology. Okay? All right. So why do the Jews, the conservative Jews call themselves the Orthodox Jews? Because they believe they are on the right path as Orthodox Jews, in contrast to secular Jews, other kinds of Jews. All right, so it is steeped in ritual and ceremony. That's one of the things you'll see in the Orthodox Church. Lots. My wife and mother-in-law, when she was still living, went to an Orthodox church for a funeral. And I mean, there was the priest carrying the lantern with the incense burned with the incense coming out, the smoke, all kinds of trinkets and things, very, very steeped in that sort of thing. So you can expect in that part of the world to find that characteristic. It's even look at the ornateness of, this is just a typical, I don't even know if it's typical, but it's an Eastern Orthodox church. Very ornate, very beautiful. Russian is the largest by far. You have Greek Orthodox, you have Russian Orthodox, okay. I don't know if there's a Romanian Orthodox. I'm not sure just how far those names go, but Russian is definitely the largest. And then about 31% of the population identify a Western tradition. That's interesting. That's a third. 16% are Muslim, many are Hungarian. So somebody mentioned Putin not liking the Western incursion in that part of the world. Well, there you go. 31% of the population of the Orthodox Church has a Western tradition. They've taken on Western characteristics. That'll worry anybody that doesn't like the West. Many of them are Hungarian. Okay, number 5, the countries of this cluster share a stormy history. By the way, you might wonder what ties a group so vast together to make it one cluster. We'll get to that. There is one particular characteristic that is used as justification for uniting all of these into one huge cluster. Many were dominated by others throughout history. This part of the world knows what it's like to experience revolutions, takeovers, coups, change of politics. They have just been through that over and over and over again. Borders have shifted over the years. Just a lot of border disputes, one country taking over another, and so on. So it's been very, very difficult. And then C, many had no independence at all until after World War I. What year did World War I end? That's 2, World War II.
Oh, you said 1. Oh.
Yeah, sorry about that.
19?
1918.
18, okay.
Yeah, when our involvement in the U.S. was 14 to 18. It ended in 18. And, yeah, and so a lot of these countries, you know, they were under some sort of a tyranny, a domination, a kingdom of some sort. And after World War I, that began to change. And I don't have all the, I don't have the know-how to explain all that to you. All right, how many of you have one of these in your home? And a lot, they're common here. You can buy these. Want to take a stab at pronouncing that?
Petrushka.
What?
Petrushka.
Yeah, Matushka. Yeah, which, oh, do I remember what that word means? I don't. Yeah, I think it has something to do with mother, from the word mater, because most of them, at least at the beginning, were mothers and children. So you have the little lady, little woman, and underneath all the children. Why would that be? Why not the daddies? Now, today you could buy all kinds. I mean, they have political guys, they have athletes, I mean, they do all, you know, it's marketing. But beginning, it was usually like this, women and girls. Why? Any idea? Oh, we'll talk about it. Their origin is debated, exactly where these came from. They may actually have started in China or Japan, but were supposedly created by a Russian monk. So we just don't know for sure. There are different theories out there. Well, let's give credit to a Russian monk for now, okay? B, a true set, you're really authentic, hand-painted. I mean, every one of the little pieces. They're not only hand-carved, but they're hand-painted. Every set is different. Now, if you got one like that, you're probably going to pay a little money for it, all right? The ones that most of us have were probably mass-produced in some factory somewhere. Who was it that said you have one of these in your home? Or does you have a, okay. Just curious, are they the mother and girly? What's yours look like?
They're ninjas.
Okay, yep, like I said, anything goes now. How about yours, Abby?
They are all they're like mother with all of the little
Okay.
girls. My dad got it from one of his students when he traveled in the East, but it's like a mass-produced one.
It's like a what?
It's not like hand-painted,
Right.
but his student brought it back for him.
Okay. Who else has their hand up? What kind do you have?
No.
Mother, daughter, is he? Okay. And who else? Which kind?
Mother and daughter ones.
Mother and daughter ones too. Yeah. All right. Guys, you don't have these? Okay. We've got a little set at home. My wife got from somebody. They were originally crafted from natural materials. Well, why? Well, you know, you think about why are we talking about these Matryoshka dolls? Because they reflect some of the realities, the life conditions that these people endured. And part of that, they found stuff, they had to travel a lot. They were very mobile people. And so they found, and have you ever noticed that most of these are very light materials? They were easy to carve, they were light, so if they had to carry them, they didn't present a lot of burden of weight. Very practical. The chubby mother and the children represent the nomadic families, where mothers cared for their children while the fathers worked the land. That's the reason the dads are often left out. These typically represented the home life, and dad was out working the fields, so the women became the authority figure in the home and society, creating a matriarchal structure. Okay, now, again, a lot has changed today, okay? To say that this whole cluster is matriarchal would be, you know, incorrect. But that's the roots. There were a lot of matriarchal. What do you call the robust Russian mother or grandmother? It's a name you probably have heard. The babushka. And I don't know the etymology of the name, but it refers to that strong, you know, protective, dominant mother figure in Russia and other areas of the cluster. All right. Constant movement occurred during the ongoing threats from enemies, just constant. And extreme weather conditions also complicated life for them. Mongolia ranges from 96 in the summer to minus 57, and that's not the wind chill. the dolls provided a practical and compact traveling toy for the children. I mean, if you have those, there's not much to them. Yeah, you start taking them apart, and you got 6, 7, 8 pieces. That's pretty cool. You got a nice collection, and the kids had a great time playing with them. They're done, stack them back up, put them away. They take up very little space. Yeah, pretty cool. All right, so again, it's just an illustration of the reality that they lived in those days, more matriarchal. So what about the nomadic lifestyles? Do you see the little tents back there? They're not actually little, they're pretty big. What do you call those? I think they're, it's a word that you guys would be familiar with. Yurts. And the different kind of yurts is kind of a bigger tent, a little more structured than your average camping tent. They actually can serve as a home, and so it was a mobile structure for them. And again, I don't know where we are exactly here, but it's one of the steps. But that would be a typical nomadic view. Again, beautiful. Look at the abundance. This picture was obviously taken at a time of year when grazing land was abundant. But what happens when the climate changes? All of a sudden, there's no more land for the cattle to feed. So what do? They move, right? If you're a sheep herder, you have to move to places where your livestock can find. And so that is one of the reasons why there was so much mobility. That and also the wars that we talked about. A lot of fighting going on that often caused people to move. All right, so let's talk about the nomadic lifestyle. The geography is diverse, from the luscious Mediterranean all the way to the desert. Do you ever wonder when the millennium begins and the curse is lifted from the earth, will there be desert? We know that in the new creation, John said, I saw no more what? What disappeared in the new heaven and new earth? There was no more, remember that in Revelation 21 or 22? No more sea. Something that salt water, as a result of flood and all that, but it wasn't. And I've wondered, the Isaiah, at least twice in Isaiah 35 and Isaiah 66, talk about the desert blossoming, something that's very local, referring like to the Negev, the southern part of Israel is deserty. But God also made it clear to his people that he would give them the land all the way from the Euphrates River over here to the Mediterranean, the river of the west over here, not river, the sea of the west. You have the Fertile Crescent here, and what do you have all in here? Desert. So if God's giving his people the land all the way from the Euphrates to the Mediterranean, and the Bible says the desert will blossom, I just wonder if the desert there is more than just the southern desert in Israel, but even referring to this huge expanse of desert between modern-day Iraq and Israel. I mean, it's hard to even imagine that today. And I wonder the same thing about this part of the world. Lots of desert here. And what's going to happen? Anyway, the Eurasian steppe, okay, that's the land trade route. There were two major expanses that we already looked at. Now, why is it the major trade route? Because anywhere where you have mountains, you're also going to have rivers, you're going to have water. You have to have water. You can't survive in the vastness of the desert for very long. And that's what happened with the Fertile Crescent also. You had rivers and conditions for travel that so the trade routes could remain open. You have the western slope. That was the home of the ancient Hittites. Anybody ever studied the Hittites before? Pretty fascinating, and they were a huge people group that existed right around the time of Abraham, and I don't have all the exact dates, but the eastern slope on the right side is present-day Mongolia. So by and large, that steppe represents Mongolia. So you've all studied Attila the Hun, right? And the Turks and the Mongols, yeah. Yeah, fascinating. Let's take a look at something here. Okay. Number 3, there is very little rainfall. and they learn how to use the resources available to them. Because of little rainfall, you learn to be conservative. You become very, word that I want, utilitarian, efficient. They live with a little bit, right? And you have to move around because where there is no rainfall, there's not going to be pasture land for very long. Letter C, though very different from one another today, these people all come from a nomadic heritage. Okay, the one main thing that ties this cluster together is the nomadic lifestyle. Not that everybody was, as we'll see in a moment, but many of them lived a nomadic lifestyle, and that, more than any other factor, brings them together. They follow a seasonal pattern of movement and return to their places of origin. But holding on to that land while they were away was difficult. Okay, one of the problems with this people group is that when the climate would change, they'd have to take their herds and move away. And the idea was when the seasons came around again, they would move back home. But many of them would go back home only to discover what could have happened in their absence. They're gone for half the year. They come back to their home and,
Other people moved in.
yep, somebody else moved in. They don't have it anymore. And this caused strife as well, and wars and conflict, So it was it was anything but a risk-free lifestyle. Very vulnerable. But they knew what the word vulnerability meant. But that was the reality, and it toughened them. They were tough, not just tough in their own character, they were tough with outsiders. Why? Because they were so used to being taken advantage of, or taken over, or whatever. So they learned not to trust people. So if you're going to minister in this part of the world, one of the first hurdles you're going to have to deal with is, how do I establish trust? This is a people group that's used to suspecting everybody. But once you get on the inside, David Livermore tells a story. I don't remember if it was about himself or about somebody else that went into a store. And I may have mentioned this in the last class in another cluster. They went into a little grocery store. He was visiting this part of the world. I don't remember which country. He goes over to grab an ice cream bar. Did I tell you guys this story before? Opens up a little door to grab an ice cream bar that he wants to buy, and he hears a voice, "Hey, get away from there!" It's the owner. He says, whoa, I just got it. You tell me which one you want, and I'll get it for you. Why'd he do that? Thinks the guy's going to steal from him. Had no intention of stealing, but it's that idea of not trusting. And he said that he kept going back. And after, fourth, fifth, sixth time back there, and kind of developing a little bit of a friendship with the guy, it got to the point where the guy said, "Oh yeah, just go over and help yourself and bring it up here when you're ready." Okay, but it took time for that relationship to mature to the point where you could trust him. So, if you serve that's not just true here, but if you serve anywhere where, there's distrust because you're an outsider, don't take it personally. We all tend to do that. Midwesterners are often known for being too friendly, and too trusting. And, how many times you talk about people, we never lock our doors, and oftentimes I'll take the dog for a walk, and if there's nobody else home, I don't lock the door, And so just the opposite there. And so if you serve in a place like that where people don't trust you, I think we talked about this a little bit in the Germanic cluster. They're a little bit, more just trusting. But just don't take it personally. That's part of their background. They lived on horseback as they followed their herds over the steppe. They wore animal skins and lived in portable tents called yurts. I don't know what they looked like way back. These are modern examples of yurts. Very sturdy. They have to be because there's a lot of wind out there too. It has to be well built. Yeah. All right, now, you say, wait a second, this doesn't look like the region we're studying. Yes, there are cities in this area. This isn't all steppes and expanses of territory. This is actually the capital, oh dear, I didn't write it down. Which country is that? This is the capital. This is Mongolia, the capital of Mongolia. Okay. Some people did settle down and become farmers. Not everybody was out wandering around in a nomadic lifestyle. There were some, in fact, nomads, letter B, were jealous of the townspeople. Why would they be jealous of them? Sometimes attacked them. Why jealousy?
Was it because they felt like their lives were easier?
Yeah. Think about it. Did God create us to be nomads? I'm not saying does God not want us to travel? I'm saying, did God, in general, when you look at mankind, was man created to keep constantly moving around, shifting? No. God intended, as a general rule, he created an earth where man could dwell. And he would expand. He said, be fruitful, multiply, and fill the earth. But you don't fill the earth by becoming a nomad. You fill the earth by having babies. And eventually, the whole earth is full of people, right? I'm not saying that being a nomad is wrong. I'm just saying that in general, when you look at humanity, humanity was not made to be on the move all the time. Okay? And so people who didn't have that luxury often became jealous of those who did. They had nice homes, they didn't live in yurts, they often built other buildings, they had neighborhoods, and that looked really attractive to people who couldn't live that kind of a life. And sometimes those people come and attack them. They want to take over their. Now, why does this city look like it does? Here we are out in the middle of, it is really out in the middle. You can't really see it in this picture, but if you look beyond the confines of this city, and I'm sorry, but I can't pronounce the name of it. It's a very difficult name to pronounce. It's expanse out there. And right in the middle, you have this bam, metropolis. The reason is because of coal. They didn't know it at the time, but somebody was doing some digging and they end up discovering huge coal deposits. And of course, that became an incredible source of income. They became rich, and ta-da, you have a major modern looking city. So one of the things we learned from this is that unless you understand why this happened, you may misrepresent the culture. You may say, oh, they're not that different from the West. After all, look, that's a very Western-looking city. Well, it's because of an exceptional situation where coal deposits were found. So I guess just another warning to us to be careful not to arrive at conclusions based on first sight, what appears to be at first glance. Okay? I would love to go and visit someday. We had a student who went to Mongolia. In fact, I think, what's his name? Okay, well, one of the Business girls that went here several years ago went to Mongolia. I think it was Janet. There are a lot of businesses, and I think Janet was the one that had been to Mongolia. Tyler Carson, I think, no, he was Peru. We had another student that also was in Mongolia. But anyways, all right, so let's talk about encountering the culture, all right? Letter A, customer service is different there. It may seem impersonal at first. They often treat people differently until you come to trust them, and that story of the little grocery store illustrates that point. And again, I just found a stock photo here I liked. They do like color. We talked about the Eastern Orthodox Church being full of rituals and symbols and gadgets and things like that. In fact, anybody here been to Bethlehem? If you go to Bethlehem, there's a church there that is considered by the Roman Catholic Church, I think, to be the actual birthplace of the Lord. There's a spot on the floor with an X in it, and they said this is where Jesus was born. Well, it's pure tradition. But it is an Orthodox church, and it is I mean, you walk in there and it looks like, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but it looks like you're walking into a kind of like an antique store, just things hanging everywhere. Looks like pots and pans, and they all have some sort of religious significance, but it looks really cluttered. And I just wonder, even if the way that, now, they're not dressed in a cluttered way, they're dressed in, it's very attractive, actually, but they love that variety of color and so on. And I wonder if some of that is a reflection of the rituals and symbols in the Eastern Orthodox Church. B, they are very hospitable. They say, wait a minute, I thought they didn't like outsiders. Right, they don't. But once you're on the inside, man, they'll take care of you. Collectivistic. Okay, very collectivistic culture. When you're there, when you belong to them, they'll look after you. Food, sorry, gifts, conversation, alcohol. I don't have any of that here, so it's not a temptation. This is just lots and lots of, they're very generous, very hospitable. And part of that, again, if you look at the lifestyle, the nomadic lifestyle and the vulnerability, they had to look out for each other. You couldn't survive out there on the steppes, the plains by yourself. You had to depend on other people. So that created more of a collectivistic mindset. Okay. Well, what cultural dimensions can we draw out of this? All right. So, well, I already gave this one away. They're very much collectivistic, more toward the family. Again, remember that in any cluster, the family is going to be a collectivistic element. Yeah. So what about power distance? How would you classify them? High or low power distance?
High.
Yeah. Can I ask why? I don't know who said that.
Just because of just looking at the war right now and just the way that their government's kind of set up and just things like that.
Yeah. And remember, if it's collectivistic, it's a pretty good guess to say it's high power distance as well. Because high power distance says we need somebody in charge that can maintain the unity of this group. If you get too low in your power distance, you get too diverse in your opinions, and then all of a sudden you have more of an individualistic point of view of the situation. Okay. What about when it comes to cooperative versus competitive? What would you think?
I would almost think competitive because of the nomadic lifestyle, that lends itself to that.
Yeah, you're right. Because of the conflict, the constant warfare that was going on, they learned to fight for themselves. So competition. Now, when it comes to family, we talk about, that hospitality and all that. Yeah, now you have more of a cooperative, but in general, because they had to deal with danger all the time, they learned to defend themselves and became very competitive in that sense. Mm-hmm. What about rules? Particularist versus universalist, how would they be?
Maybe particularist just because they're collectivists.
2 for 2. Doing well. Yeah. What was your reason again? Can you repeat that?
Because they're a collectivist group, I guess.
When you have nomadic groups traveling all over the place, you know that they're not going to have a set of rules that applies to everybody in that region. It just isn't going to happen, right? You don't have that dynamic, and so it becomes very, very much a particularistic application of rules and things like that. Yeah. Now, if Putin has his way, it'll become a very universalist society because everybody will be expected to, that's one of the problems with breaking up the Soviet Union. All of a sudden, all these countries that used to be under the USSR flag are now free to establish their own laws, their own norms, and that is not to his liking. All right, how about some do's and don'ts in this culture? Do learn greetings or how to say thanks. Like a lot of cultures, there are different ways that you say something like thank you, depending on whether you're talking to an adult or a child or equal, okay, or stranger or foreigner. If you're in a home and you're a visitor, you will greet the family differently than you do once you're accepted as part of them. Different words you use. In other words, different vocabulary for the in group than for the out group. Interesting. Very interesting. Don't refer to cultures as former Soviet republics. Okay? Just like you wouldn't refer to the Germans as former Nazis. Well, Nazi was a party. It wasn't an accurate reflection of the Germanic culture, even though Hitler tried to convince them that it was. So, and look, when it comes to this, so, you know, when it comes to the issue of communism, the jury is still out. We don't know what's going to happen as a result of this conflict right now in Ukraine. We don't know if, we still don't know if Putin will really be successful there or not. I mean, statistically speaking, he should be, but the Ukrainians have defied the statistics so far, you know. But like you said, I think, you know, we're not sure when you were talking about Ukraine, it's hard to be sure if what we're hearing is just political propaganda to encourage them or encourage the rest of the world or not. It's kind of hard to say. But I heard as many as 15,000 maybe have even been killed of Russian troops. Yeah, I don't know. But whatever you do, don't refer to them as Soviet republics. Just, you guys remember the Warners that were here, right? Spoken Missions Conference. Where are they serving? Romania. And I don't know if any of you have seen his prayer letters, get his prayer letters, but they made a trip, at least one trip, maybe more than one, up to the border. I can't really see it well here, but yeah, that hurts my eyes. They've gone up to the border to help bring refugees in from escaping from Ukraine, coming into Romania. Okay, it's quite fascinating. And I've even seen some numbers in the news, but I can't remember any of them now, but tens of thousands of refugees. Isn't it interesting how much we hear about refugees in our day? I mean, we have students here who actually, you know, came from refugee camps. They've seen it firsthand. They've lived it firsthand. And here we have it happening again in Ukraine. C, do try to eat foods served at someone's house. And we've seen this before, and we'll see it again. In some cultures, the food is the extension of their arm. And so to cut off their food is to cut off their arm. To reject the food is to reject them. Now, we do better with that here. I don't know, maybe you ladies don't. I don't know, maybe you're very sensitive about people liking or not liking your food. I don't know. I'm not, because beyond toast, I can't do much. But in some countries, just to say, no, I don't eat that, I don't like that. So what do you do? If you're gonna eat in a home in this cluster and you have food allergies or something like that, it's very, very important that you make that clear before you go, look, I have a medical situation, I'm not able to eat this or this. Okay, if you don't, you just show up and you don't eat it, you push it aside, it's a huge offense that may make it very difficult, set you back maybe years in terms of being able to get to know these people. So food's a big deal. We'll talk more about that later too. That clock says 11, but my stomach says, nope, it's at least 12. Do expect expressive greetings. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know why that one didn't get, that bothers me. So just a second. I'm gonna fix that. One second. All right. Well, I can hear your stomach's growling. Okay, sorry about that, just a little maintenance. All right, finally, do expect a greeting to an outsider to be aloof and cold. Just remember, when that happens, it's not a permanent condition. You get to know them, you respect that. Don't try to force a friendship, because all you'll do is create more of a space. Okay? Let them distrust you. Be very patient. That's why in a culture like this, if you go for a short-term missions trip, you can easily come back with very, very maladjusted opinions about them. And if you're going to serve there, you want to be in there for the long haul, because it's going to take time to nurture these relationships. But in the end, it's worth it. Liz?
When you're in a culture like that, is it better to remain distant yourself, or would it be good to be open to them and not expect that openness back?
That's a good question. I've never been to this cluster, but just based on what I've studied, I would say if you're going to err on the side of being a little more cautious. What's the word I'm trying to think? Be a little bit more quiet, a little more reserved. I think that's a good word. Be a little more reserved, because they're not going to view that as being rude. We sometimes view somebody who's really reserved as being kind of rude, but not in this culture. But if you try to be overly friendly, they might think you're trying to pull something over on them. Yeah. Yeah. So if you're typically a reserved kind of a person, you may find that you feel more at home in this culture than you would if you're a Brazilian going to this culture. Yeah. Good. Questions? I'm developing a bad habit here of finishing a little early. That's not a bad habit. We love it.
It's because you don't have the people giving their articles.
That's part of the reason. Yep. Although I can't say that I have this time so exactly that's, yeah. All right. Well, I don't know if there's any food out there from this cluster of the world. We're about to find out. Thanks.